They say the winners write history, but what if the losers just never got the mic? It's a phrase you've heard before, a cliché, a warning, a truth, maybe. But let's unpack it, not as a slogan, but as a hypothesis. Does victory alone grant control over the narrative of the past? And more importantly, is that narrative permanent? From ancient empires to modern revolutions, the victors often stamp their version of events into textbooks, national myths, and public memory. But history is rarely simple. It's messy, subjective, and it changes. Take the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar's conquests were recorded not just by historians, but by Caesar himself. The Gallic Wars wasn't a diary, it was propaganda. His voice, immortalized, shaped how millions viewed him across centuries. Or think about the colonization of the Americas. For generations, the dominant narrative celebrated discovery and expansion. But in recent decades, that story has been challenged, reframed through the voices of the colonized. A correction or a new bias. So maybe the real question isn't, do winners write history? Maybe it's, who's allowed to speak at all? Let's start where history often does, with empires. Ancient Egypt carved its victories into stone. The pharaohs weren't just rulers, they were gods in their own historical records. Defeat wasn't an option. If a war went badly, it simply wasn't mentioned. The same with Mesopotamia, where kings like Sargon or Ashurbanipal commissioned inscriptions glorifying their reigns. These weren't neutral reports. They were performances of power, made permanent in clay and stone. But here's the twist. We only know about many of these winners because their stories survived. Entire civilizations, their languages, their victories, their defeats vanished. Not because they lost, but because their records didn't make it. The Harappan civilization, the Olmecs, the Etruscans, advanced societies, rich cultures. But their voices are faint. Not because they were silenced by winners, but because time and chance weren't on their side. So maybe the question isn't just about who wins. Maybe it's about who has the tools to preserve their version of the story. Let's jump forward. The fall of the Aztec Empire. The Spanish conquistadors didn't just defeat them. They erased and rewrote entire centuries of Mesoamerican history. Burned codices, reframed religious rituals as savagery, claimed divine right. And for hundreds of years, that narrative held. The civilized brought light to the barbaric. But as archaeology, linguistics, and indigenous scholarship pushed back, the cracks in that story widened. Now, some see the Aztecs not as monsters, but as a complex, advanced society with brutalities not unlike Europe's own. History didn't change. The narrator did. Let's talk about revolutions. When the French Revolution happened, the monarchy didn't just fall. Its entire story was flipped. Louis XVI went from divine ruler to enemy of the people. The guillotine didn't just cut heads, it erased legacies. But even within the revolution, power shifted. Robespierre was a hero, then a tyrant, then dead. New winners rewrote the story each time. The ink on truth was barely dry before it changed again. Same with Russia. After the Bolsheviks took power, they rewrote Tsarist history. But decades later, under Stalin, even the story of Lenin and the early revolution was altered. Photos edited, allies erased, enemies invented. That's not history, that's narrative warfare. And it still happens. Look at North Korea. The official story of the Kim dynasty is closer to mythology than fact. But inside the country, it's treated as absolute truth. There are no losers, just glorious victories. On the flip side, there's revisionism, where history is re-examined and sometimes rewritten by those who weren't in power. Think of civil rights in the US. For decades, textbooks focused on presidents and wars. Then voices like MLK, Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X pushed into the narrative. Did they win the wars? No. But over time, their influence reshaped the record. That's the power of persistence, of survival, of eventually being heard. Now let's talk about today. Who's writing history right now? In modern warfare, the pen and the feed are just as powerful as the sword. Look at any recent conflict. Ukraine, Israel-Palestine, Syria. The battle isn't just for land. It's for the narrative. Each side pushes a version, through news outlets, through social media, through influencers even. And depending on who you follow, you might think you're looking at two completely different wars. But here's the catch. This is live history, and the winner hasn't been decided yet. So we're watching the narrative form in real time. Uncertain, emotional, fragmented, and yet decades from now, one version will likely dominate textbooks, museum exhibits, national memory. But whose version will that be, and how much will be missing? Even in peacetime, countries fight over history. Debates over statues, holidays, school curriculums, they're not about the past. They're about ownership of the story. Control the narrative, and you control identity. Values, legitimacy. So maybe winners write history isn't a rule, it's a tactic. The real power isn't just in winning, it's in making people believe you deserve to. So is it true? Do the winners write history? Yes, but not always, and not forever. Winners often write the first draft. But over time, cracks form. New voices surface. Old records get uncovered. Entire stories shift. Not because the past changed, but because our lens did. The losers? They don't always stay silent. Some fight to be heard decades, even centuries later. Some get rediscovered by accident, buried texts, oral traditions, whispered resistance. History isn't a monologue. It's a tug of war. And now, with the internet, the gatekeepers are fewer. More people can tell their side. But that doesn't mean the truth always wins. It just means the noise gets louder. So maybe the better question is, who do you believe? Because in the end, history isn't just what happened, it's what we accept happened. And that makes every one of us, reader, viewer, citizen, not just a witness to history, but a participant in how it's remembered.